I would get to introduce Troy Magid. He is the director of Southwestern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, and he will be our first speaker today.
Thanks. Well, thanks for your time. I was asked to kind of kick off briefly this morning with just an overview of the region that we're talking about today. I actually work with the Southwestern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission. I'm the executive director over there, but we work closely in partnership with Prosperity. So I was going to hit a little bit of the demographic aspect. There's a lot of workforce challenges we're going to talk about, but I was going to touch off and kind of introduce the day by talking about the demographics across the region. So as Abby mentioned, when I talk about the region, we're talking about this 6-county area: Crawford, Richland, Iowa, Grant, and Lafayette and Greene. Populations vary from about 16,000 to 53,000, somewhere in there. So within the world that I work in Southwest Wisconsin, we see a whole lot of demographic trends. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I think you all be aware of it. We have population that is either stagnating or declining. We have aging populations, all that kind of driven by lower birth rates. It impacts school enrollment and labor force. So again, big picture numbers. If you know me, I've probably bludgeoned you over the head with this enough. But just to kind of set the stage for where we are, this is the 6-county population change from 2010 to 2020. So in the bottom here, you'll see overall the region declined by about 0.3%. That ranges from about a 0.5% increase in Grant County to about a 4% decline in Richland. Driven by a whole variety of things. One of them is this, which is a national trend. This isn't anything to be taking personally. We nationwide are seeing birth rates decline. But you can see here across the 6-county area, our birth rates declined by about 13.9 live births per 1,000 population, down to around 10.4. Some are more extreme, some are less. I put the red line on there just as an indicator. That's the 08 recession. So we often see folks having fewer children or holding off on having children in times of economic uncertainty. So as we move into getting the COVID data, it'll be very interesting to see how this kind of plays out in the future. It impacts our schools. This is your future workforce. So this is a map of the 20-year school enrollment around the region. If it's red, it's an enrollment decline. And if it's blue, it's an enrollment growth. So this is direct from the Department of Public Instruction. And then, of course, it filters through to our labor force. I don't have the regional number up here. Carol, apologize. The labor force has been impacted across the region by and large. And Crawford County was one of the biggest, about a 23.6% impact. The labor force, Greene County, about a 1.5. Interestingly enough, we always have to look at the data a couple different ways. Lafayette County's census data suggests they lost about 1.3, 1.4%. But their birth rates are up, their live births are up, and their labor force is up, which tells us there's folks living there who are not filling out the census but are on the payroll somewhere and are getting birth certificates. So that's a whole other kind of workforce challenge as we think about the dynamics. I'm not here to be a prophet. You're going to hear about this again and again. If you pick up the media, you're going to see this all over. So this is just a broad overview to kind of set the stage of this aspect before we move into how some communities are working to address this. All manner of news organizations are reporting on this. Think tanks are laying out policies as to what should be done. If you're following this, this is probably not news to you. Neither will this next section. I'm just going to highlight some of the things that I see in my world and at regional planning and sometimes at Prosperity. We often work with local governments. So many of you are in private businesses. Obviously, local governments are employers as well. Some of the things we see, this is a sign down the road from Platteville. It's been up for a spell. Probably not going to go away. To some degree, there's a supply and demand issue. Fewer people means fewer workforce. I think we have something like 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 each day. We would traditionally think that wages would go up with this level of competition, and in fact, they have gone up. But this is data here reflecting the top 10 occupations. If you're a data geek, it's 2-digit SOC code. But the top 10 occupations in the 6-county area by number of jobs. And then the 2016 to 2021 change in the median hourly earnings. So the median hourly earnings for the top 10 occupations in the region went up between $1.26 to $5.69 across that 7-year period. Inflation was about 24.65%. So the numbers on the far right are the percentages over or under inflation at these different occupations, the median hourly wage at these occupations met. So for instance, educational instruction, library occupations, they were about 18.76% behind inflation, the median wage for those occupations. So we see wages going up. I think this is good to put in perspective. This, of course, is a big factor. If you're an employer, you've no doubt felt this, constant turnover or the challenge or risk of turnover. The average turnover of these occupations is about 57%. This is just 2022 data. And again, the impacts, poaching, overtime pay, loss of institutional knowledge. These bottom pieces here are the ones that don't show up cleanly on the ledger. If you have constant turnover, it's hard to be stable enough to innovate and be efficient, right? You're constantly hiring and training. So these are kind of the off the ledger book impacts. So at Regional Planning, and in partnership with Prosperity, we're either identifying in our communities ways to address this, or frankly, sometimes just listening and stealing their best practices. So I wanted to kind of gloss over the gloomy doomy stuff because there's a lot of organizations doing some really great stuff. And I think we're going to hear more about that. Well, in fact, I know we are. So just briefly, the stuff that we're seeing or we're working on as we help folks think about how to compete for employers or sometimes work for population overall. How do we get them to come here, right? How do we collaborate in ways we haven't before? Asking questions whether or not we need to do everything in-house, whether we can share positions, share staffing, whatever that looks like. And then a key question for strategy is whether or not there's something we should not be doing anymore. How do we focus on a mission? And what does that mean to say no? So when I talk about competition, I draw heavily on, we're talking about a value proposition when we work with our communities, defined really as identifying which customers you're going to serve, at what relative price, and what you have to offer them. So too, when we think about an employee value proposition, we need to create that in organizations. Who do we really need to attract, or what jobs? What do they need that we can offer them, and what's our relative compensation? That value proposition for the employees, we're advising folks, constantly needs refined because the workforce constantly needs refined. So I'll go back to the school enrollment. This is our future workforce. We know this is changing. If you look at Darlington here, strain your eyes, you'll see Darlington across 22 years had about between a 1% to 5% enrollment decline. However, if you go back 10 years, you'll see it's radically different. They've had almost, what is that number? About a 13% increase in enrollment. And the reason is very simple. They've got a whole new population they never, ever, ever had before. You can see here the white enrollment and the Hispanic enrollment, which is now about 30%. So as you're looking to hire, we need to think about what these folks want in the workforce. What do I need to provide them? And we can have the same conversation where we're talking about generations, millennials versus boomers. We can talk about male and female and any number of things. But how do we sort of triangulate our value proposition to these folks to make sure they want to work for us? Because they're interviewing us as well, right? The other thing we have folks think about is who are your non-customers, right? If you're, so this is again, it's called Blue Ocean Strategy framework, but this has us ask who are the folks that aren't our customers and why? And so we can pivot that as well to who are your non-employees and why? And think about that critically. So that first tier of folks who are not your employees anymore are those folks who got one foot out the door. They absolutely want to leave and they're looking for a reason. Tier 2 are those folks who don't want to be your employee anymore. They've either left, and hopefully you did an exit interview, or they never wanted to come to your place anyhow because you don't have what they want. That Tier 3 non-employee will be folks you never even thought of. You didn't even know they're out there. You don't know how to get a hold of them. So for all my gloom and doom about declining population, it's actually an enormous asset if we know how to find it and grab it. There's a book called Startup Nation, about the nation of Israel and all the startups they have and the capital they bring for startups. And it's heavily influenced by diaspora. These are folks who used to be here or from here and who have left. But they still have a home here. They have thoughts. They have memories. They have family. Anecdotally, you can probably think of someone who moved out of school, got out of school and left, and now want to come back home, right? So how do we capture those folks and market to them and bring them back? The other thing, and I'm going to put my plannering hat on because this is a little farther off in the horizon, is what does it mean to be in Wisconsin during an era of climate change? So we at Regional Planning are exploring this through a lot of different lenses, as a lot of folks are, but we're looking at workforce and economic development issues around this. It is potential that Wisconsin is going to be in a little better shape than other places. So we ran an analysis. We didn't create this data. We found a good data source and we started mapping it. So this is county level data on the projected rise in sea level between 2040 and 2060. So it's a little ways out. The number of very large forest fires per year. The projected days with high wet bulb days. Wet bulb days is when it's so hot your body needs to sweat, but it's so humid your body cannot sweat. Very dangerous. The projected weeks per year above 95 degrees. So Wisconsin here, where we are, it's about projected 2 weeks a year. I think we get maybe 5 days a year now or something like that. And then climate change, the cost of climate change, a projection of the cost of climate change as a percentage of GDP. This is preparation. Governor Ron DeSantis' $85 million plan to armor the coasts and put the dunes back in place and so on. It's mitigation, it's recovery, it's rebuilding, it's all that stuff. So we ran all those maps together. Just curious to see what Wisconsin looks like. I'm not saying that Wisconsin will be great and perfect and climate change free, but if I know, as I do, where folks have migrated from my area, and I know generally the occupations that work elsewhere in these areas and the industries that are elsewhere, we might have an attraction strategy down the road. It's got to be intentional and long term, but it's possible. So we talk about how to think about competing for folks we never thought about. We also need to compete in brand new ways. Tasha Blindert is our amazing office manager. Her predecessor, Sonia Silvers, came to work for us 2 days a week as an office manager, and she was employed 3 days a week as the Village of Benton's deputy clerk treasurer. Sonia finally came to me and she's like, Troy, I got to leave. I was like, what are you talking about? I'm working 2 full-time jobs for local government. I have no health care. I got 2 kids, et cetera, et cetera. And so I said, well, I had no idea you're effectively working for local government full-time with no health care whatsoever. So I called up Gary McRae in Benton and I said, hey, what do you think about Sonia? Oh, I love Sonia. She's great. Well, she's going to leave you. So we started having this conversation. And we both want to keep her. And she has no health care benefits. Health care benefits cost money. But I said, Gary, can we pay this together? Let's pay for this person. Number one, it's the right thing to do. She's been working for us. She deserves it. She's awesome. And turnover's a pain in the neck. So we're actually paying more than we had under the previous arrangement. But we have had one turnover issue from Sonia to Tasha, and it was well managed, well planned, with incredible institutional knowledge handover. So we don't always need to do the things in-house, right? We got to find new ways to work together. Another way we see communities working together to address employee needs is through some innovative public-private partnerships. So the Village of Benton, Gary McRae again, has been, as the village president, has been directing Benton to build out its own housing lots for about 20 years. All these little different colored blobs are all the housing lots developments that have been put in place. The game is that the village will build the village will build the roads, sewer, water, infrastructure, get the lots buildable. And then they'll sell the lots as they come on board, which has been, everybody's been talking about this. And so I said, well, I'm curious what the ROI is. So I went over and I talked to Benton and Sonia Silvers, our employee who was there at the time, because we had a good relationship, because we're sharing the staff member. And I analyzed this 22-lot development down here, the Rolling Oaks. So briefly, here's the cost. The Village of Benton put its own tax dollars in, $916,000. Sewer, water, curb gutter, roads, shovel-ready lights graded. $38,000 per lot. They get about 22% of that back upon sale, $7,500 for the lot and $1,000 for sewer water fees. So if you look at it through an ROI or maybe a return on capital investment would be a better analysis, they need about 26 grand, 27 grand per lot to get their money back at the village. Since 2018, I think, when they broke ground, they've sold 22 of the 24 lots. 17 are complete on the tax roll, so I went to the tax roll to see what the tax roll said about these houses. There's currently about $4.8 million of fair market value in these houses. Average fair market value is $282,000. You can see some of this data. The average tax per lot is $5,000, of which $1,200-ish goes to the village per year. So that return on investment is about 24 and a half years, which if you're in private business is not something that you would probably tolerate. But a village with the demographics that we just talked about, like Benton, it's a good value. But what I liked about Gary is that he looked at the village's tax base and then he looked at the community, because he's first and foremost a community guy serving on the village board. So the total community tax revenue is about $3,100. When you add in the schools' property taxes, it's the second smallest district in the region. So that brings your community wealth ROI down to about 9.5 years. We did a survey, Tasha, 2 years ago or something like that, of these houses. I was curious to know how many kids in there. At that time, there were 6 students living in all these homes. It's a lot of empty nesters. They pay property tax, and that's fine. There's about 6 students in there. The village gets about $9,500 in aid per student, something like that. So when you add that in, again, the community wealth ROI is about 5.5 years. Of course, the school district is the big recipient here, right? So again, public-private partnerships. The Benton State Bank, a guy named Steve Malone, who actually helped invest in some of these lots, they actually were giving zero-interest construction loans during the process as well. And wouldn't you know it, some of these homeowners now banking at Benton State Bank, right? It's aligning your mutual interests. It's philanthropy, maybe, but it's also aligning your mutual interests. So it's a really great model. They work with the local realtor, Lloyd Dressler. They're not in the real estate business. They know what they're in. They're building lots. So Lloyd's pushing these lots. They're great-looking houses. Some lots for sale. I think if you're interested, talk to Abby Haas. She'll get you one. Oh, and they had outlots. So no return on investment on the books on the park, but they had an outlet because they had absolutely no parks anywhere near this place. So that's how we're kind of seeing models collaborate and pushing folks for increased collaboration. And then the last thing, frankly, is part of competitive strategy is learning how to focus. What should we really, really, really be doing? And this is where all the heartache comes in. It's not easy conversation in local government, but we see it. River Valley Schools closed 3 of its elementaries a couple years back, consolidated in Spring Green. Iowa County closed its nursing home. They were spending like about $1 million flying nurses in from Ohio. They just simply couldn't keep it up and couldn't staff it. So the county board talked about this for about an hour, and they realized they're county government. They have law enforcement, they have highway shop, they have child protective services, right? They fought the fight, and they fought the fight, and they fought the fight, and then they focused. So these, depending on your point of view, are not cheery, but the question is how robust and resilient is the organization and its core mission, right, as we think about strategy. So I think that's my time. Just a brief introduction to the reason, a couple case studies. I could sit here for about 2 hours telling you all the great work that's being done to address this, but this is our process currently. So I appreciate your time. That's me if you want to chat more.